And that's what's really remarkable is in this world of information is it's ease that's winning in B2B sales today. It's the supplier that can make it easier for you to get the information you want that helps you advance and complete these purchase steps and stages to make a final purchase decision. Those are the ones that are more likely to win today.
I want to welcome you to my sales podcast, where we have one focus and one focus only. That is helping you, the sales community, and sales leaders create more conversations with more qualified buyers, ultimately leading to improving your sales productivity and closing more deals. Each show, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you find, engage, and connect with more buyers. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., and you're now listening to the Selling with Social Sales Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the AAISP Annual Leadership Summit, where the sales community comes together to learn, share, and network. Join us this April 16th through the 18th in Chicago. Visit www.aa-isp.org and click Leadership Summit 2019. And to save 30% off your registration, use the code Vengreso 30%. Mr. Scott Collins, welcome to Selling with Social, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Great being here. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. And for those of you that don't know my friend, Scott Collins, so Scott is the Vice President of Advisory, Sales, and Service Practice at Gartner. I've been watching Scott and following Scott as we attend different types of sales conferences. Scott has been a speaker talking about many different topics. One of them is my favorite on the B2B buyer's journey and how that has changed over the course of time. And so recently, actually, Scott, you and I were together at Sales 3.0 and you were speaking. And I said, you know what? This is like the third time I've seen you speak on this topic. I got to get you on the podcast. And so I'm so glad you came and are spending some time with us to shed some light on this particular topic that we're going to be talking about today.
Great to be here, Mario.
First off, I want to talk a little bit about you. Give me a little background. We've got sales leaders, we've got sales reps, we've got marketing leaders, sales enablement, and business owners listening in. Just give us a background about yourself, where you grew up at from just a business perspective, and how you got into the role that you're in now.
Yeah, happy to. So carried a bag many moons ago. That's where I started, falling in the technology space. And so did that for a number of years. And then got interested and introduced, honestly, into the sales effectiveness and training realm. So I spent at the same company where I sold another 7-8 years almost, just doing sales training effectiveness, enablement for a while, and then found my way to Gartner here. It's been, I think, over 7 years now, working with all these folks who are listening as sales leaders across the world in a variety of different roles. Came up doing it, being a practitioner, and now get to support practitioners.
Yeah, I love it. And you spend a lot of time with senior leaders around the globe. And when I say senior leaders, not just senior leaders in sales, but senior leaders probably in marketing as well as the C-suite, helping them to understand some of the changes, the things that they need to do in order to be able to reach today's buyer. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. So yeah, absolutely. You'd be surprised how often I'm talking to CEOs and the rest of the C-suite, oftentimes brought in by chief sales officers and your listeners to help with strategy, to help sell the idea of, look, like things have changed in the B2B marketplace. Our customers do buy differently. We need different strategies, and bringing some data behind it, I think helps all of us.
And I couldn't think of anyone better than the great Gartner, which is the name behind much of the research that's out there. So before we get into this topic, I've got a very special question to ask you, Scott, and every one of my guests get the honor of answering this question, and I'm looking for something juicy. Give me something juicy. And so the question is, tell us something nobody would know about you by looking at any of your social profiles.
No, nobody would know that before I actually got a real job and sold, I was a caddy at a private country club. I am a big golfer to this day. But as part of being a caddy, one of the best guests I ever got to caddy for was Michael Jordan. So got to spend 4 or 5 hours on a golf course carrying a bag for MJ back in the day. So that was fun.
So the real question is do you keep in touch with him?
If only. I do have a signed card behind me up there on the shelf. So
there you go. You've got the signature. So if MJ is listening, Michael Jordan, if you're listening to this or someone knows him, make sure you get this podcast over to Michael so he can hear it. And maybe you, as a result of this podcast, he might reach back out to you, man.
Yeah. I won't hold my breath, but you never know.
I love it. All right. Well, let's get into this particular topic. One of the things here at Vengreso is we're, as you know, I'm a digital sales evangelist, and it's really on the lines and the things that you talk about in terms of the B2B buying journey, how that's changed, especially over the last few years. And you guys have done some real interesting studies and have some great data points, albeit I think it's from 2016, and you've got some probably updated ones since then. I spend, Scott, about 200 meetings a year with executives. In fact, I'm over 200 meetings this year. And there's something that just really bothers me. And that is that I spend at least 2/3 of my time talking to senior sales leaders about this thing called the internet. Now, most people are listening and are probably saying, come on, be real. But the reality is I'm being for real. This is no joke, man. I'm really spending time on, wait a minute, help me understand what you don't understand about your buyer and what they're doing or where they're at or how they're engaging with your website, your reps, with information, with the research before they even talk to your salespeople, right? And it's really sad that as B2B sales leaders, especially those of us that are 40 and older, which is both of you and I, 40 and older. I think you are, because I hope you are. Otherwise, I just aged you. But it's really sad that we have not thought about the buyer's journey in a different way, which would change, in fact, the way we sell. And so teeing all this up, you guys at Gartner have done some research. Based on your research, talk to us a little bit about how you have seen the B2B buying journey change over the last few years.
You hit the nail on the head, Mario. It's almost shocking, right? Where we all use the internet every single day. We're constantly taking in information. And yet when we talk sales, it's like, things have changed, but nothing's really changed in terms of leadership's viewpoint oftentimes. And before I get to the data, interestingly, part of it, I think, just stems from, as sales leaders, the biggest lever we have to pull is talent. And so we always look at it through the lens of the in-person channel that we control, that it's our sales professionals and what they do in front of the customer and with the customer to influence the conversation and drive our customer to be, pick us over our competitors. And so I think we as sales leaders oftentimes end up in kind of that jaded vision a little bit because, well, I can control talent, right? It's well within the realm. I can't control what my customer is doing. And so what is my customer doing is, well, they're doing a heck of a lot of learning without us and without our sales professionals. And some of our more recent data, just in about the last year and a half, as you mentioned, when we asked B2B buyers, all involved in a complex purchase decision, to give us how much time they spent on a variety of buying activities proportionally, they told us that on average, 27% of total buying time is spent researching independently online. So the single biggest proportion that we found in the data was that 27% of researching on their own in the digital space.
Now, to clarify that, 27% of the time that they would spend in total, or 27% of your respondents said that they
27% of time.
Time. Okay. So the total amount of time, so if you look at buying time as a 3-month long cycle, 27% of that time is spent independently researching the data points, the information, the application, the solution, the problems that it solves, the business case, the client case studies, asking people, for referrals, all that stuff is spent without even engaging with a sales team. Is that right?
Well, what's interesting, so to your point, that might be happening while I'm also engaging the sales team, or at least someone's supplier. So I'm certainly researching early, right? I'm just going to go kind of help figure out what my problem is, or I know there's some ways to solve a problem that we have. So I'm going to do some research. Certainly, we find that in the data. What we have found is customers, even when they begin to engage sellers, what we would kind of call that in-person channel, they stay in digital. They continue to do research online. A lot of what they're doing is validating what we're telling them in the in-person channel, whether that's, again, going to places like our website as suppliers or going to a variety of other places online to gather that data or information. So we like to say that just because in-person begins doesn't mean online ends. Our customers buy in a parallel process, both the in-person and the digital today.
That's a great point. Just because in-person begins doesn't mean online stops or does not influence them.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, great. Okay. So of the B2B buying time that is spent on key buying activities, 27% is done researching independently online. And this is, of course, a group of B2B buyers that Gartner surveyed to be able to get this data. What are the other percentages?
On average, they spend 22% of time driving consensus across stakeholders. What we've found, when you think about that 22%, that is herding the cats, right? That's getting people on board, keeping them on board, dealing with procurement that gets involved inside my organization later as the buyer. And what we continue to find is the number of people keeps growing. So we found in our newest research this year, it's anywhere from 6 to 10 stakeholders as reported by customers.
Wow.
And so not surprisingly, I'm spending a whole lot of time talking to other people, trying to come to some consensus. And a lot of what they're doing in these meetings, we also found this past year, is they're deconflicting all of the information they found in that 27% researching online. So everyone is doing their own independent research. And now I got to get in a room and come to some consensus together. And so we spend a whole lot of time talking through, well, here's what I learned. Here's what I found online, or I had this conversation with someone. So a lot of time just spent dealing with consensus internally.
I'm going to parallel this, Scott, to a recent transaction that Vengreso did for a software application for our learning platform. So we researched 27 different providers and platforms that were out there. In our case, as a small business, we had 3 people doing the research, including myself. And we did not reach out to any of these providers. We did the research. You took 10, I took 10, someone else took almost 10. We decided to get back together and look at who might be able to fill our needs. But then we realized something. We didn't have consensus on what the needs were. Right? So then we started saying, okay, well, wait a minute. Do we really need this? Okay, we do need that. All right, well, if that's the case, then we need to go back and do some online analysis to see if they can do this, 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 and that. And we started putting together our matrix. We developed a consensus. We came back and met together, and we looked at all the different components, and we said, okay, these folks definitely look like they could probably meet, and these folks definitely not. So then we were able to weed out a significant majority of that, and we narrowed it down to 10 providers that we thought could do what it is that we wanted them to do. Now, mind you, we had different people researching, and not only that, but in addition to the ones that we thought were like the top 5, we were reaching out for referrals, doing LinkedIn searches and keyword searches to see who may have had that inside their profile that we may have been connected to, where we saw that there was a connection or even a connection with anybody at that company that was in our network. We reached out and said, hey, have you used them before? And that was all happening behind the scenes before we even placed a phone call. So is this what you're talking about?
100%. And what you also describe is actually something we're seeing all the time, is when you went back after all of that research and you had that first meeting saying, well, wait a minute, we actually aren't even thinking about what we need. And we have to take a step back before we take a step forward. We've termed that looping in B2B buying. And what's interesting is in our customer data, 90% of customers said they experienced that exact moment of, we thought we completed a buying task and we had to move backwards in our process. And so essentially everything from a B2B buyer's perspective is all about this looping. Everyone's doing it. Exactly what you described. I'm sure every listener who's been involved in a purchase decision went, yep, we did that for this CRM we were looking at, or we did that for a different sales enablement technology, right? Whatever they may have been involved in. That is absolutely what we're seeing happen in the real world. And then I can be enabled with all this information. And that, by the way, it's pretty good information, right? That there were times, I'm sure, where you went through and like, oh, well, that's not very good information. Like, that's not helpful. But there were other times like, wow, this is really high quality stuff that I was able to find on my own. I didn't have to have a conversation with a supplier or a sales rep to even learn it.
Yeah, well, interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that we did was we created our matrix. And with that matrix, we started saying check, 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 no, maybe, unsure, unknown, right? And what we did was, before we even had a conversation with the salesperson, we would reach out. If we had a connection, we would reach out to the connection. If we didn't, then it was a cold entry into the provider. We would, in the first initial outreach back to us, which was usually a BDR or an SDR, in the first initial outreach, we would send something back and say, here are 21 requirements. Before we get on a call, please go ahead and respond whether or not you can handle any of these requirements based upon how we've described them. And I'm going to go off on a whim here and say there were at least a third of the respondents that said, we can discuss this further when we get on a call. We can discuss this further when we get on a call. And you know what? I don't have time. I didn't have time. I don't have time for that, right? As a buyer, I did not have time. And if you couldn't figure out a way to answer my question, barring that you didn't understand it, if you didn't understand it, we would re-articulate it and give it back to you. But this was all done through digital, like email, chats, all done through digital. We did not want to have multiple calls, 27 different calls, in order to narrow it down to our top 3, top 4, top 5, whatever the number was, right?
That's right.
And it was funny to me how many reps try to, if you couldn't handle the problem, don't get me on the phone. Like it's not a good use of your time, or it's not good use of my time. Move on, right? And a great example is we have HubSpot. And if you didn't have native integration, guess what? Unless you were going to custom build it for us and get it done in the time frame, which some people did say that, then it's not worth having a conversation, because I'm not looking to do things manually.
Yeah.
But a lot of folks wouldn't tell us that information until they had a call. And that was super frustrating through this buying process, because we didn't want to waste our time versus their time, right? So that, I think that's what you're talking about in terms of like the independent research, the meeting with the buying group, this looping back process, or I think you called it a back loop?
Yeah, just looping.
The looping process, of reestablishing what is important to us. So that was, I think you said 22%.
22, yeah.
Our meeting with the buying group. What happens after that? So we've got 27, 22, we're up to, what is it, 9, 49, 49. Oh my God, 49% of the buying process time without even engaging a sales team.
Yep, and it gets worse.
All right. Share with us how it gets worse.
There's more learning. 18% customers report of, again, total buying time is spent researching offline. So the old school, so you got the connection via LinkedIn to a customer who went down that path with that supplier, but at some point you probably scheduled a call or picked up the phone and talked to that customer, right? That customer reference or that individual.
Yep.
So that's a more traditional offline conversation that you had, right? Or if you happen to go as part of the process to a trade show or a conference where you just talked to some people and you learned about it, that would be another example of kind of the quote unquote offline research or offline learning.
So essentially taking the time as a buyer to validate what solution another peer may have used, what were the problems, issues, whatever it is they came up against, pricing that they may have gotten in the marketplace, possibly even, and some of the good things and or bad things about that particular provider. That's like that researching offline. And to your point, yes, where we could find a reference without talking to the actual organization, we absolutely called. And I can tell you that before even talking to one of the providers, another sales training company we found out was using one of the platforms that was our top 3 choices. And I called up their CEO and said, hey, I heard you're using, and he said, yeah, we absolutely are. How is it going? And he gave us honest feedback, which is they're our current solution provider today. They've been okay, but over the last year, they have suffered in terms of support and delivery for the things that we need. And my question was, well, why do you think that is? And that was because they're challenged with growing the revenue. They've been cutting people back. So if you're going to go with them, know that you probably need to find an outside person to help you with blah, 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 blah. So all of that was like super important information because this particular provider, they had the technology that we wanted. They had this native backend integration that we were looking for back into our HubSpot CRM and marketing automation tool. But in the back of our mind, we knew that there was a problem with one of our peers in the industry, not a competitor, a peer. And the thumb up was kind of like, it was a neutral. It was like, for those you can't see Scott and I in person right now, but there's thumbs up, there's thumbs down, and then there's thumbs sideways. It was neutral. So it was a net neutral reference as a result of the last year's worth of experience that they've had with this particular provider.
I love that example because think about like you're having to put an RFP together, right? And that's going to be one of your potential suppliers that you might put it out to. There's two others. And think about how powerful that is for now, the type of criteria you might put in or change in the RFP. Something like, how is this company doing in their market? Are they adding and investing in their business versus not? Like, that is not a traditional RFP piece of criteria that most people put in, right? But I would not have known that if I didn't learn how to buy or how to think about some of these very different criteria without a conversation like that. It's really powerful as a buyer to get that kind of perspective. And think about if you had been empowered with that kind of information that you just found in the digital space on your own. What if there was a supplier that had actually given you just kind of general, oh, and by the way, if you were also thinking about these criteria, those might be important too. I wouldn't have had to find this guy, or maybe by chance, I would have not learned it. Whereas, wow, now this is very helpful for me as a buyer to find it on my own.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, what you just stated, so what happened was when I found out that information, after our initial vetting with this particular provider, I said, hey, I want to have a call with your CEO. Now, the director and the vice president said, well, you haven't been fully vetted yet. When we get to that point, we'll be able to have a call. I said, no. My process is I want to have a conversation with your CEO to do executive alignment. And they're like, well, we really don't want to waste his time. We haven't talked about budget yet. And I said, look, guys, you could either follow my buyer's journey or not. And they actually did not want to arrange that call. So I said, no problem. Got off the phone call. All I did was do a lookup using seamless.ai, did a search on the CEO. Within 2 seconds, boom, found the CEO's phone number, placed a call to his mobile device, and I had a call scheduled in a week. And then the sales team, and I understand, like I'm a buyer, but I'm also a trainer to the sales community, right? So I understand how this might have really ticked somebody off. Well, the sales team came back to us and was like, WTH, what are you doing? And I said, listen, I told you what my buying journey was. You did not listen to it. So here's what I expect you to listen to what I'm looking for. Because what they didn't know was that I had this in the back of my mind, this back-end reference. And the back-end reference said, your service and support sucks. So when I got on the phone with the CEO, I didn't tell him that this is what I had heard. I started asking questions all around growth. What's happening? Why are you constricting? I noticed that on LinkedIn, your company page shows going down. Tell me about the changes going on in your business. What are you going to do to improve that? How does that affect service? And he was very forthright and honest with me in terms of what he was doing, with how they were constricting the business and changing it from a modeling perspective. And it allowed me to ask questions to say, so what might have this been the result over the last year with some of your clients? And he was like, yeah, it absolutely could have been. In fact, some of our metrics showcase that. But here's what we're doing to get it back here. That happened, and it allowed me to understand, look, that conversation only happens with an executive to executive relationship. And then I said, all right, sounds great. And now I allowed myself and the team to continue on with that conversation because I understood now the problem that I was looking for and what they're doing to solve that problem. Does that make sense?
It does. And what I like about that example too is what you went through is the sales team actually made it harder for you to buy their solution.
That's exactly right.
Because you were looking for information. Now, the information that you were looking for was at that executive level was from their CEO, or you probably could have got it from the sales team had they actually been able to get it or figure out exactly what you were trying to learn or understand. But you were simply after information that helps me make a purchase decision. And as you said, match and go through the buying journey that I'm on. And that's exactly what we find is too often we are making it more difficult for our customers to buy versus making it easier. And that's what's really remarkable is in this world of information is it's ease that's winning in B2B sales today. It's the supplier that can make it easier for you to get the information you want that helps you advance and complete these purchase steps and stages to make a final purchase decision. Those are the ones that are more likely to win today.
Now, some people listening might say, hey, Mario, did you ask the sales team about this information? Why wouldn't you just go through the sales route? Let me tell you what happened, Scott. I did ask about their customer delivery, their success, their customer satisfaction rate. And the answer from a transparency perspective that came from the sales team was, oh, everything's great. Our customers are happy. We're at our scores are phenomenal. Our scores are fantastic. Well, what they didn't know was one of the largest clients that they had talked about early on as a reference had already said neutral or slightly in the last year, right? So there was no transparency in the salesperson's process. And here's my message to sales folks listening in, right? If your stats are showing that you're having a challenge in the industry, and I'm asking questions about that, likely I'm not going to come to you and say, hey, I called up one of your references and, that CEO actually told me that your service over the last year has been subpar. Why would I do that? I'm not going to tell you that information, but you know the data. And you've got to speak to that and be transparent because what you described, Scott, in terms of this researching independently offline, I think you said it was like 18%, that research independently offline, I'm going to likely get that data. And you've got to be transparent. And then it would allow, if the sales team was transparent, it would have allowed us at Vengreso for us to be able to say, let me talk to your VP of sales or your COO or whoever it is so I can get a better comfortability on this particular information. But there wasn't. The sales team did exactly what most sales teams do. And they talk about how wonderful and how great they are, how amazing, how awesome, and how everything's going to be hunky-dory. No, guys. My response to you is, I'm going to tell when we're in a sales process, we're having the best quarter ever in the end of 2018 here. And when there's going to be a problem, I'm going to tell you where the problem is going to be. When you're asking me to do something that is not part of the standard process, I'm going to tell you where the problems are going to creep up at. Like, you've got to be transparent in this process. And that's what made me go the alternate route to go get the information I wanted to before I went down this particular path or continue down the path with the sales organization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing, Mario. Every example leads to another proof in our data.
Exactly.
Which I love is there's a lot of skepticism today on sales professionals, honestly, more than ever before. Yeah. Why? Because I have access to all this information now, because I can validate almost everything you tell me. And so if you're not going to be transparent or if you're not kind of giving me the full truth, I'm probably going to find the truth anyway, or find that information if I haven't already. Like in your case, you were already armed with that information.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting in terms of that skepticism on sales professionals, when you cut it by generation, it's worse when you look at younger generations. So what we found is we indexed and we asked buyers in the data, again, all part of the buying team, how skeptical are you of any claims made by sales reps? And when we indexed it, boomers were 1x, Gen Xers were 1.4x. So they were 40% more likely to be skeptical of a seller than a boomer. You get to millennials, 2.2 times more skeptical than a boomer when it came to any information I was provided by a sales rep. And so we've got to be really cautious, to your point on this transparency, is we already are potentially in trouble because, by the way, the oldest millennials, they're on buying teams now. They're in many companies starting to become or already executives too. We have to know some of these things going in if we're going to, again, help them buy, if we're going to be dealing with this age of information we're in and them doing all of this research.
Yeah. Interesting, Scott. One of the things I look back on this particular scenario with this particular sales team, if the sales team had done their homework, they would have understood before referencing all these different sales training companies that were utilizing their platform. They would have understood, am I connected to any of these executives where as soon as you say, oh, Johnny, Susie, Billy, Mary, right, with this company, I'm thinking I'm going to reach out to them if I know them, right? That as soon as you say that and use that as a reference point. And that's the sad part is the entire sales team. Not one time did they ever look at my LinkedIn profile. Not one time throughout the buying process. And now they could have had their settings privatized and it could have been like a member a LinkedIn member. And if that's the case, if you are a salesperson or a sales leader listening to this and your sales team is not public, they do not have their settings public, shame on you, because that is like a virtual calling card. Someone could see who's looking at their profile and it's something that your team should be mining every single day. So in this particular scenario, provided that they didn't have it privatized, which is a wrong thing to do, not one time, and I would look back, which sales team member is actually utilizing my profile to see who and where I'm connected to. And that was the sad part is they would reference names and they had no idea whether or not I was connected to this person. And it was just so easy for me to be like, oh, Johnny, Susie, Mary, whatever. I can go look these people up and I know how to get a hold of them, right? Because I'm connected as a sales training company, as a sales influencer. I'm connected to many of the world's top sales influencers, right? Yeah. I cut you off there where I'm getting down. We've got a 27% researching independently online, 22% meeting with the buying group, 18% researching independently offline, and then there's another set of percentages left. But before we get into what's left, because quite frankly, you haven't told me at all yet the time that is spent with the actual sales team, like buyer to sales team. As of right now, 27, 22, 18, correct me if I'm wrong, that's not what the sales team is what buyers are saying. Okay.
We have not got into sellers yet.
Holy crap. So this is super problematic, but I want to know what percentage of time is the B2B buying community spending with potential suppliers? But before we answer that question, hang tight, and all of you listening in right now, listen to this important message from our program sponsor. Vengreso will once again be joining the AAISP and hundreds of sales leaders in Chicago for the 11th annual AAISP Leadership Summit. And we want you to be there with us. Sales leaders from around the globe will come together for a learning experience unlike any other. Attendees will find pre-event workshops, large and small group learning, a technology expo, as well as the annual Inside Sales Awards Gala. Join us in Chicago on April 16th through the 18th. And for all of our listeners, visit www.aa-isp.org. Go to the Leadership Summit 2019, and to save 30% off your registration, use the code Vengreso 30%. That's Vengreso 30%. All right. Right before that particular break, we were talking about the proportion of time spent on key buying activities with the B2B buying community. And we talked about researching independently online, 27%, you said. Meeting with buying groups, 22%. Researching independently offline, 18%. At this point, we're up to, what's that percentage? I can't do the math. 67% of the time that I, as a buyer, am spending, and I haven't even spoken to a salesperson. When do we talk to a sales team, man?
17% is what customers report. So 17% of total buying time is spent meeting potential suppliers.
Whoa. Let me just think through what you just said, because this is huge. Hold on. 17% of the time is spent meeting with suppliers out of the full 100% of the time that I would spend in the whole buying process.
That's right.
Okay, let's break this down for a second, though. On average, we probably would have, 2-3 competitors?
Yep. Our data tells us 2 to 3 is right about there. On average, customers talk to 3.4 suppliers.
So let's just say it's 3. I'll meet you halfway. I'm actually getting a little less than 6% of the total amount of time with a buying committee, 6 to 10 people. That's what you said in the latest research from Gartner. 6 to 10 buying influencers. I'm only getting 6% or less, assuming 3 competitors, of time spent on the buying process.
That's right.
Whew. I got to stop for a second here, because those of you listening in, Scott, I don't know. That's huge. Not huge. As in, that's a huge problem. It's a small amount of time, but it's a huge problem. You know what I mean?
That's right. So one, what does it tell us is we have a huge access problem in sales today.
Yeah.
We're not getting the time. And let's be honest, how much more can we even attempt to increase the 6%? Right? When you look at it from a customer perspective, when you look at all of the time I'm spending doing these other things, we really can't increase the amount of time they're going to give us and we're going to get. But what we can do is elevate the value that we provide in those limited opportunities. There was one head of sales when we first released this. He said, it makes a ton of sense. He goes, we really have to increase our batting average on this because I can't get more at-bats at this thing. And by the way, if I screwed up the first time, I'm probably not going to get a second time. And so it really comes down to making sure we're giving customers what they need in terms of making a purchase decision, which comes back to this, making it easier for me as we were talking about earlier. But yeah, this is a huge problem. By the way, this doesn't mean we're out here talking about the death of sales either. We absolutely know that there are things that you can only do via human interaction. And we do know in the data that customers are engaging sales professionals, not only late in the journey in terms of supplier selection, they are talking to sales professionals and learning from sales professionals when it's problem identification, when they're trying to look at requirements building and solution exploration. I am still talking to a person from a supplier oftentimes, but I'm doing that to get information. What I wake up as a buyer when I'm in a purchase process is not, you know what I need today? I need to talk to a sales rep.
Right.
And that's not what we think as buyers. What do I think? You know what I need? I need really good information.
Yep.
And if I can get it via the person, great. And that's really what we have to kind of change in sales today is the denominator in the less access, highly digital space now is information is the currency. And our teams providing information that helps customers more easily complete that purchase journey.
That leaves really about, according to my calculations, it leaves about 16% of the portion of time spent on key buying activities. What is that last 16%?
It's just a variety of kind of random activities. We've called it other.
Okay.
It doesn't slot easily into kind of the four big groupings we've talked about. So there's just kind of some quote unquote other stuff out there.
So really what you're saying, Scott, is our buyers are out there gathering information, and this really validates, quite frankly, our Vengreso mantra, which is digital engagement is key because buyers are out there looking and consuming information. For God's sake, Scott, I don't know. I'm going to say this here on the podcast because it's my podcast. But for those of you who can't see it, I'm holding up, Scott and I are looking at my mobile phone right now. We take this freaking thing to the bathroom and sit on the pot with us, right? I hate to say it, and all of you are probably laughing, and some of you are probably grossed out, but hopefully you clean your screen. The point is we take it to the bathroom with us. What are we doing with this thing? We are pulling and consuming information at a crazy alarming rates, right? And that having been said, digital is a format of which is not the end-all be-all, but it is a way that we must be engaged with our buying community in terms of bringing them into our network, connecting with them. And whether you're messaging them, it can't be pitches. We're talking about value-based messaging here, right? What value do you bring to the business problem that I'm looking to solve? And guess what? I may not have that business problem at that point in time for the product or solution or service that you offer, right? Nonetheless, I still need to bring valuable content to the table that you can consume and read without engaging with me. So my question to you is, if you think about this process, the portion of time, you talked about the different generations. So across the different generations, the millennials, the Gen Xers, the boomers, are B2B buyers using digital sources throughout the buying journey differently?
Initially, a lot of people would say and hypothesize they probably are different. It's probably all the millennials driving all of this digital engagement and digital learning. And yes, the data tells us, in fact, when we ask this question, so we cut the data by generation in terms of when across the purchase process did you use digital? Did you go online?
Yeah.
And so not surprisingly, millennials were anywhere from 93 to 95% throughout the entire process, from very early to all the way right before making a purchase decision. Then when you cut it and look at Gen Xers, they're anywhere from 90% early, but then they stay there. They stay in the mid 80s, low 80s even. So for a Gen Xer, once I hop online, I pretty much stay online too. And then boomers, they're using it too. Now they drop a little bit towards the end before the purchase decision, but even still, our data tells us almost 70% of them were still using digital when getting really close to that purchase decision. But they were in the 85s, 86s early on in their purchase journey or buying journey using digital. So even boomers today, they've got smartphones and know how to use them. I can fire up a web browser pretty easily and type something into Google and get plenty of options and start to do some learning on my own. So yeah, everyone's using it.
Yeah, interesting. I remember you presenting this a couple times now, and if you define the buying journey as like an early, a middle, and a late stage, you just gave all the numbers. And one of the things that was really interesting was that boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials, to your point, are around 70%. I think if I'm not mistaken, it was like 65% to 95% was for boomers to millennials are using it early on. And to your point, Gen Xers and millennials are pretty much staying at above that 80% of the time they're using digital towards the late stage. Mm-hmm. And then there was a slight drop off in the boomers down to, I think it was 68% or something like that. And it was interesting because I thought about that. And I thought, why would boomers drop off that engagement towards the end? And the only thing I think of was, I've been in sales for 21 years, was that at that point, by the time they get towards the end of the buying process, they're starting to develop relationships. And so maybe they're taking more time to get to know the different players in the industry and all the different key buying decision makers. But the reality is that boomers are unfortunately on the way out, and we've got our Gen Xers and our millennials. I think our millennials make up 50% of the workforce now, if I'm not mistaken, is the number, that are becoming now the key decision makers. And if buyers are using this digital format throughout the whole process, I guess my question to you is so given all this data, what does it mean for suppliers and sellers today? Like you just said it earlier, is it the end of salespeople? Is this the kiss of death for salespeople?
Good news, it's not. It's a recalibration we have to do in sales and honestly in marketing too. Like commercially, when we think about go-to-market, is traditionally it's been marketing early, sales late, right? Like a traditional funnel, and build MQLs in marketing, throw them over the fence, and sales can take them from there. And what that has turned into is, well, then marketing owns digital on the left, early funnel, and then sales is the in-person on the right, and they own that part. Well, that's not how, as we've been talking about, how B2B buyers buy. They buy in parallel. And so we've got marketing sales, we need to go marketing sales in terms of alignment and think about customers completing the tasks that they're trying to complete through buying, using both the in-person channel and the digital channel. So
Scott, you and I are in person here. We can see each other. And for those of you listening in, you couldn't see Scott's hands where he was showing marketing and sales on the left-hand side. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said you've got marketing on the right, you've got sales on the left. But where we need to go is what you said is now you put your hands on top of each other stacked. Marketing and sales are together going to market and aligning, as opposed to two different groups and two different tasks. Is that right? Is that what you meant by your hands?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry about it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So think about it. Left to right is a serial commercial engine, right? It's a series of activities, usually starts with marketing and then it ends up in sales and we move it from there. Versus the hands on top of each other visual it's a parallel commercial engine, right? I would run it in sequence. And then that way, see, from a customer or buyer perspective now, I can bounce through each channel. Because by the way, that's what I'm doing in reality, to get information. And so the big part then for us in sales is, are we enabling our teams to deliver the information that buyers say, that is what helped me advance in my purchase decision? Mm-hmm. Did it help me, or did it in fact make it more difficult? Was it even of value in terms of me making buying decisions and completing the tasks I need to get done as a B2B buyer? And the good news is, what we found in our data is suppliers who can make it easier for customers to buy via information that help customers advance, we're 3 times more likely to win a high quality, low regret deal in our data. A high quality, low regret deal, high quality, the customer said we didn't settle for a lesser solution. We kind of bought that bigger, better option. We paid a premium for that. So these are the deals we all want because they're higher margin, larger opportunities, but also they were less likely to regret the purchase that they made as well. So something we have found in previous data is if buying is too overwhelming from a customer perspective, even when they make a purchase decision, they end up regretting making that decision with that supplier. So we can pay a heavy price if they regret it. So again, huge upside to this idea of our sellers delivering the right information to our customers. But that also means I have to think about, are we also doing that via digital too?
Yeah. At Vengreso, we talk about our sales team thinking like a marketer, but acting like a salesperson, right? This term has been out there for a while, but a smarketer, right? It's a sales and marketing. If you think about it, marketing markets one to many, whereas salespeople market one to one. Within a territory, within a micro region, within a vertical, right? Mm-hmm. We're doing the exact same thing. So if you think about all the techniques that marketing is using, you've got a website, they're engaging with video, they're leveraging social channels. You have to stop, which are all digital platforms, by the way. They're using email marketing, right? You have to stop and think, why is it that the sales team is not doing the same thing? In this world of sales, we are still measuring our salespeople off of the number of freaking cold calls that they're making in the marketplace. We have not aligned their LinkedIn profiles, which is their personal website, right? When they go to engage with a buyer, if I reach out to you, one of the first things that you did when we reached out and connected with each other is, well, you look back at my LinkedIn profile. Who is this guy, right? So the same thing happens with a buyer. If marketing's reaching out, you've got a reference, which is the website. You go to the website. If a sales rep reaches out, you should hopefully have a place a buyer can go. And it's going to be your, in this case, LinkedIn profile, which should not be your reference to your quota-crushing sales rep, your 16-year all-time President's Club winner, earner. It should be a valuable resource that helps your buyer along the journey of who you help, how you help, what business problem you solve, what are the customers you may have done it for. So you give them that information all right there. And that's really what's frustrating in the industry is that the buyer has changed. And we say this, Scott, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, but the modern buyer has gotten smarter at buying faster than sellers have become at selling. And that's basically because sellers are not following the buyers on the buyer's journey. Like we still have the same antiquated processes, the same methodologies that we're engaging in, which is not basically buyer enablement, right? That's essentially what it boils down to. And I think you had an opinion on buyer enablement, and I may have used your term incorrectly, but that's the way I think of it. Tell me a little bit more about buyer enablement.
Yeah, so it's the name we gave this information that helps buyers advance, right? So buyer enablement is exactly what buyers want across that purchase journey. So in the research this year, we identified there's 6 buying jobs that customers in the B2B space have to complete. What's interesting, and we talked about it earlier, is it's not linear. They're looping, right? I'm going back and forth and moving between these buying jobs I'm trying to complete. The only way that I can complete them more easily is, did I get information that helps me do that, right? So yes, I'm smarter, but boy, there's a lot of information out there. A lot of it's really good, but buying is still awfully hard. And so if I need the right information, and that's what we've now called buyer enablement. Buyer enablement really has 2 components to it. One is it's prescriptive. So let me tell you what you should be doing. And I can do that via information. I don't have to always tell that to you as a seller. I should be when I'm in person. But a piece of collateral or a tool that we create or ask our sellers to use when in front of a customer can be prescriptive, can give that how they need to be thinking about it. But it also gives them the how-to. So when we're done with the conversation, or when I found this on your website, I still have to go do something with that information. And so buyer enablement, packaged the right way, actually helps me take action with it and do something with the information itself. And so we think from a sales perspective, this is very heavily an enablement story. We're actually for 2019 going to start looking at a little bit more of the how in terms of how sellers are posturing or delivering or doing the work behind the scenes to deliver this kind of information. But it's really that buyer enablement piece this year that came to light.
I love it. We call it here at Content for Sales Enablement, which is content that the sales team can be enabled with to solve what you called buyer enablement, right? And so a great one is we talk about a digital sales program. There's so many companies out there that are looking to leverage digital, and they go to LinkedIn and they're like, oh, we're going to go buy LinkedIn Sales Navigator. LinkedIn's like, yeah, okay, we're going to sell it to you for $250,000 and we're going to train your whole sales team. Yeah, no, that's not going to work, right? Like a fool with a tool is still a fool. So you've got to have, there's a whole process that we go through. There's 10 steps that we take buyers through and say, here are the 10 steps, whether you're going to do it yourself, hire somebody else, or work with LinkedIn or SalesLoft or whoever it is that you're working with from a technology perspective, go through these 10 steps and make sure that your team is prepared to develop the skill set behind using this technology to engage with the buyer, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a great example of what you talk about, content that helps the buyer on the process and enabling the buyer. That for us that's one of those pieces. And I'll come back to, I want to close out my story on this platform since we carried it all the way through. What was interesting here, Scott, was one of the most important things, and I was one of what ended up being a 4-person decision-making team, right? We're a small business, a 4-person decision-making team. I was one of the 4. But one of the things that was most important to me was executive alignment. And there wasn't anyone except one sales account team that understood that. And that one sales account team understood that there needed to be executive alignment between myself and one of our other executives and their particular executive team on where the future of them, where they were going, what their level of investment was into us, and how they were going to help us given our size and scope as the largest digital sales transformation training company out there. How were they going to help us get up to speed and up to running? So what we ended up doing was we made a decision to purchase a platform from another provider who did not have the native HubSpot integration, but committed to developing it based on certain timelines and showcase their expertise that, hey, if you want it, we can do it, we can develop it. And that was all as a result of what was most important to me throughout the buying process was I aligned at the executive level in terms of our strategy, our vision? Did you understand it? And the rest of the sales teams who tried to prevent us or block us from having that alignment because they want to control the process, they didn't win. Now, I'm not saying our buying journey is the exact same as everybody else's buying journey. And Lord only knows I'm a salesperson myself, so selling to me is probably very, very, very difficult. But I do know one thing, and that is that there was only one sales team that enabled my buyer journey. And the one that was most important to me, and that was the one that won. Does that make sense what I just said?
I would bet that executive alignment came down to information. Came down to 100%. You needing to know very specific things and have answers to certain questions. And they may not have been, again, like super specific about the product, as you said, but it's about vision of their organization and longer term partnership, right? But again, that was for the supplier selection job. For you to complete it, you needed that kind of information to feel confident that you've completed it and we can check the box and we can now make a purchase decision. And you selected the only supplier that gave you the information that helped you complete that buying job.
Yes. And the best part was, at least from our perspective, is we supplied the selling teams with the exact same set of information. We said, we would like to help make sure we understand that this particular aspect on the alignment standpoint, which means, and I wrote in every one of the messages, which means that we likely need to be aligned at your executive level ranks. Mm-hmm. And most of the sales teams wanted to hold that back. Oh, my sales director can answer that. Oh, my vice president of sales can answer that. And so the ones that figured it out was that, oh, let me bridge together our CEO and do some CEO to CEO level alignment. And that was it. They understood that. And those that didn't understand, that is where I would challenge sales teams to say, help me understand, Mario. How would you feel comfortable? What would make you feel comfortable with this particular comment here that you wrote? Are you looking to meet with our vice president of sales, our CRO, our president, our CEO? You tell me. And if people would have asked that question, then at least I would have recognized, okay, they read what it was as an important element to this particular buying process, right? And I would have told them the answer. I would have told them that answer.
Yep. And if nothing else, had the organization given me, as a seller, at least a few of the talking points or bullet points to start with, I could have offered that up to you and then led into, is this enough? Does this help you feel confident or answer the questions and give you the information you need? Or you might say, I really want to have a conversation with your CEO around these. I have some deeper questions. Okay, great. Like, I might not have that as the seller legitimately. And to your transparency conversation earlier, but now I know that. Or as a buyer, you could have said, nope, that's exactly what I needed to know. Answered it. Like, we can move on. I'm confident this is the right decision.
Absolutely agree. Man, this has been a phenomenal conversation with phenomenal insights on the B2B buying journey. Before we cut out here, if people want to connect with you, Scott, it's SCOTT, Collins, COLLINS, is the best way to connect through LinkedIn, Twitter. I mean, what's the best way to reach out to connect with you?
LinkedIn is best. I am on Twitter. It's S Miller Collins is my handle out there as well, but most active on LinkedIn.
So we'll make sure we put Scott's link to his LinkedIn profile and his Twitter profile into the show notes, guys and ladies and gentlemen. And what we want to make sure that you do is when you reach out to Scott, please make sure you send him a personalized connection request and tell him you heard him on the Selling with Social podcast. And Scott, I got one last question for you, my friend, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank Redemption. Why?
I could watch it over and over again. There's just like, it's a real story to me. It's hard to pinpoint.
All right.
I never get tired watching it.
Well, good news is you're not alone. We've had out of 100 episodes, we've had a few folks who've mentioned Shawshank Redemption. I'm glad you did. Scott, bro, thank you so much for joining me here on the show. And for all of you listening in right now, stay tuned for this very important message right now. Hey, thanks for listening to the Selling with Social Sales podcast. Did you enjoy that show? If so, would you do me a huge favor and give the Selling with Social podcast a rating and review on iTunes? That would be super awesome. Also, if you want to easily find our show, just go to Vengreso.com. That's VENGRESO.com and click on podcast. From there, you'll find the Selling with Social podcast. Thanks for listening in. And until the next show, be awesome. Mario Martinez Jr. out. Don't forget to check out the AAISP's 11th Annual Sales Leadership Summit in Chicago, April 16th through the 18th. Visit aa-isp.org. Click Leadership Summit 2019 and use the code Vengreso 30%.